Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Bill Lester. I'm with University of Florida IFAS Extension in Hernando County. And joining us today is going to be Dr. Geoffrey Meru with the University of Florida. He's a researcher that works down at the Tropical Research and Education Center down in Homestead, Florida. And normally he's going to work with farmers and small growers on different tropical and subtropical vegetables that can be grown here in Florida, but home gardeners are trying to grow the exact same thing. So I thought it'd be a really good idea to have him on here to share his knowledge and tips and advice for anybody interested in growing Calabasa pumpkin. So Dr. Meru, it's all yours.
Thank you, William. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you okay.
Okay, perfect. It's great to be on this program and to meet home gardeners. So today I'll be talking about Calabasa. And the way I've organized my talk is to give a general background and go further deeper into what we do at the Tropical Research and Education Center, some of the effort and teams that we are collaborating with. The project is growing rapidly now, from where we were a couple of years ago. So this is my outline. Biology and classification, give some statistics on production, nutrition of Calabasa, flesh, and a little bit on seed, and then we'll dive into what is Calabasa, how are we breeding better Calabasa, how can we grow Calabasa in gardens or in farms, where to get seeds, and then some of the disease and insect problems that you might encounter while doing this. So where plant breeding? How did I end up in plant breeding? So my home country is Kenya, which is in East Africa, and anywhere between 80 and 90% of the population, directly or indirectly, depends on farming, on agriculture. So there's cash crop farming, animal farming, and subsistence small-scale farming. So I grew up on a farm, basically. And so there was a natural impetus to learn about plant sciences, especially having seen some of the challenges that local growers are facing. And that's how I ended up in plant breeding, or pursuing a career in plant genetics and breeding. So I started with sorghum breeding, where I did my master's looking at drought tolerance. When I came to the US, I went to the University of Georgia and worked on watermelon, looking at Fusarium wilt resistance, which is a major problem in the Southeast. And then I looked again at powdery mildew resistant breeding in ornamental crops in Tennessee. I joined UF in 2016 as a vegetable crop geneticist. My appointment is split between research and extension, research at 80% and extension at 20%. So for research, I basically do applied and basic research. For applied, my goal is, what I'm doing today is to talk about germplasm, improve germplasm to growers that they can adapt, or at least consider adapting, developing hybrids that can enter the market and offer superior resistance package or a superior quality package. And then for the basic research, I try to understand the genetics behind the traits that we see, like disease resistance. What genes are being expressed to make the disease, some plants tolerant to the disease. And that is important because once we figure out that, we can use a process called marker-assisted selection, which allows breeders, instead of taking 10 years to breed for a good Calabasa, we can take a fairly shorter time. And this, I'm not talking about GMO or anything like that. It's just traditional breeding, but using genetics, advanced genetic tools to accelerate the process. For the extension, I'm glad to be on this program. I enjoy doing this, interacting with the stakeholders. And my goal is really to impart knowledge and training about what we do at TREC and UF in general, and see how we can transfer this to benefit our stakeholders. So education and training is part of my work for extension, and I also try to introduce niche crop, of which Calabasa is a niche crop currently, not such a big crop now. And then I write informational articles through EDs and offer training to extension agents through ISTs. So in 2016, when I joined, this was kind of the top crops produced in Florida. And being in Homestead, the southmost part of of Florida, I had to choose which crops I would focus on. So snap bean, squash, and pumpkin. Squash specifically are big crops down in South Florida. Watermelon is big from central all the way to north, and they are either one or number two in the nation for this. So the other crops, there's already some breeders working on tomatoes, on pepper. I'm not sure about cucumber, but I narrowed down to these three crops, and that's how I decided to work on them. So I'll go a little bit more on the Cucurbitaceae family, a little bit about the biology and the classification. So Cucurbitaceae family is a huge family. The Calabasa, all the squashes and pumpkins, they share this family with watermelon, cucumber and melon, and then calabash and bitter melon and rufus. You may be aware of this. Together, this family contributes around 11% of all the vegetable produced, which accounts for around 1.3 billion in value. So it's a major crop in the U.S., vegetable crop at least. I think we're stuck here. Let me try. There we go. All right, so specifically, the squashes and pumpkins and calabasas belong to the Cucurbita genus, among which 12 species are cultivated. 5 of these are cultivated, especially in the U.S., but primarily in Florida and Southeast, we have 3 primary cultivated species. We have the Cucurbita purple, Cucurbita moschata, and Cucurbita maxima. And there's 2 ways to consume this crop. You can either wait until the fruit is mature and hard, and this is what we call winter squash. And the reason it's called winter squash is because you typically would plant it either in spring or early July or early August, and then you'd harvest it and you'd eat it, consume it through fall or through the winter season, so because it can store for a fairly good time. And then we have the summer squash, in which it's grown and harvested typically 5 to 7 days after the fruit is starting forming. So we consume the young fruit. If you let the fruit grow too old, then the skin becomes too tough and it's not enjoyable as much. So in Florida, Cucurbita purple and Cucurbita moschata are the primary species grown, just because they're well adapted to tropical and subtropical climates. In terms of nutrition, the flesh of Calabasa and pumpkins in general, they are low-calorie powerhouse, rich in vitamins A, C, and E. Vitamin A is what you see, the beta-carotene. The deeper the orange the flesh, the more the beta-carotene, or the more the vitamin A. There's other minerals such as phosphorus, calcium, potassium, magnesium, and manganese. And then we have vitamins such as niacin, riboflavin, thiamine, and folate. So you might be aware of the popular ways of using pumpkin in general, but I'm not sure whether you knew that seeds are also a popular delicacy. As a matter of fact, the seeds are high in energy. 50% of the weight is seed oil, which is incredible. And protein is around 35%. And the oil, the good thing about the oil is that it has healthy fatty acids, which lower, they boost immune health and lower things like cancer risk and things like that. Phytosterol is also good for prostate health. So the seeds, especially in Central and Eastern Europe, the seeds are wide, a big commodity. The oil is highly valued that is extracted from this seed, and it's given as a high-end gift, usually to communities or from family to family. And since the oil has a very low smoke point, it's not used as a deep frying or anything, but it's used in desserts or a very mild temperature cooking just for flavoring. Other uses of squashes and pumpkin include the ornamentals. The leaves in some cultures are eaten. I've eaten some leaves of squashes, and they taste really good. They have a bold flavor, and the ones that I consume are those that lack the hair on the side of the leaf, so it's much easier to eat. In terms of production, what I'm showing here is the production of summer squash, which is the yellow, the zucchini squashes. So as you can tell, the greener on the map a state is, the more they produce. So Florida and Michigan are some of the top producers, and then we have California and New York. And Florida dedicates the largest acreage to summer squash production, followed by Michigan, California, and New York. However, as you can tell from the yield, we don't get as much yield out of our acreage. As a matter of fact, per acre, Florida is 100 carat weight less than Michigan, for example. And we think the reason is because of the semi-tropic climate, which allows for proliferation of diseases and insects and eat up some of our produce. But the good news is that we can get a good value for our produce. And as you can tell, we get the most value for our yield. And the reason is, I believe, is because we are able to produce summer squash when nobody else in the country is doing it, especially during winter time, when it's unconducive to produce it anywhere else. So that's the advantage that allows us to earn premium for our squash. So I'll move a little bit more now in depth on Calabasa. So what is Calabasa? You might have gone to many stores, Publix, especially in South Florida. This is really popular. They have a dedicated section for Calabasa, and the reason is because of the high population of Latina and people of Western Indian origin. So in the U.S., they are sold as fresh cuts. You can see they slice them up, then they sell them per pound. And typically, the size that you're seeing there would cost anything between $2 and $3. So it's pricey. On the right side, this is a picture of a Calabasa in a local market in Dominican Republic. And you can see the pieces that they sell are much larger. So again, most of the Calabasa that we consume in the U.S. in general, they are imported from the Caribbean, from Puerto Rico, from Dominican Republic. And in Florida, although this production of Calabasa is not as, it wouldn't meet the demand of the national demand. So Calabasa is also called tropical pumpkin or Cuban pumpkin, Uyama, Zolo, Zapala, so different names for it because it has a rich history and different people call it different names. As I mentioned before, it's a minor or niche crop. In the US, the value is 30 million and increasing. And the reason I'm saying it's increasing is because of the increasing number in terms of the population, especially the Caribbean and the Latin population that are moving, especially along the East Coast. The value is around 5 million in Florida, at least the data that we have. I haven't done a recent survey. But I need to follow up with FDAC and see whether they have some farm gate value for the crop. So how do we use Calabasa? You can roast Calabasa. I love them roasted. You can make curries out of them. In Haiti, the national independent dish is made of Calabasa soup. So they take different vegetables, include Calabasa, some meat such as beef or goat, and they make, that's the national, it's celebrated as a national dish during independence. We have canned pumpkin. The lady's pumpkin is, I mean, they call it pumpkin, but it's, and people mistake it to be the cucumber pepper, but it's not a pepper, it's a moschata. So it's very closely related to the Calabasa. It was to give you the pumpkin they use. You didn't tell it, I mean, it's long, elongated, tan color on the outside. It just looks like Calabasa. And I'm growing some up in Homestead. We'll see how it turns out this spring season. You can make bread. I've seen candied Calabasa. There's ale. You can also make ale. And I'll be talking a little bit about some of the work we are doing on that. And the seeds can also be, you can roast the seeds. You can dehull the seeds. You can make seed butter. And the cool thing about seed butter from pumpkin is it's not allergenic. So it's non-allergenic for people that are allergic to nuts, that can consume peanut butter or any other kind of butter that has allergens that their bodies can't tolerate. So versatile. And this is just a few ways to use Calabasa. There's a myriad of ways to use it. We're hoping to develop kind of a database or a sheet where we can accumulate all the recipes that have come across and publish that as an EBIS article. And people can, they can get creative in how they prepare their Calabasa at home. I think that will be really encouraging. Certainly, I need that for my home as well. So when you look at Calabasa, why are we doing breeding? And breeding, by breeding, for those who are not familiar with that, breeding is a process of improving something or getting into a crop, a trait, or a characteristic that you desire. So in Calabasa, the primary breeding goals are things like flavor. Flavor means the taste. Is it bland? Does it have a rich taste? And many people have different flavors, and so it's a variation there. But there's a generally acceptable flavor that is expected from Calabasa. The dry matter is how thick and how hard it is to cut the flesh. So the harder it is to cut, the more the dry matter. So high dry matter is desirable, but in some cases, in smaller pumpkin where people like single serving, we want to breed for low dry matter so that it's easier to scoop out and eat. Earliness denotes how fast a pumpkin or a calabaza grows and matures. So in that sense, if a plant starts to flower early, then the sooner the fruit will form and mature. So for earliness, we shoot for early flowering because they are correlated, highly correlated. Then we have yield. How many fruits does each plant yield per plant? How many fruit per plant? Vine length, especially that is really important for home gardeners, where you don't have a lot of space to grow your Calabasa. You may have space for 10 plants or 3 plants, I'm not sure, but you don't want something that will overtake the garden, especially if you're growing other vegetables as well. So these cultivars that have long vine, and more recently we have some that have much shorter vine. The fruit shape and size is important. The size for now that in the US especially, people don't buy the whole, as I mentioned, they just buy fresh cut and they go use it, and when they need it, they come and again and buy it. But we are thinking of breeding for a Calabasa that is a single serving or maximum 2 people serving, and you just cut half, use one today and use the other the next day. So, but when you go to the grocery store, they prefer the big ones because they can cut it into different, multiple pieces and sell them that way. As I mentioned, the nutrition is high in beta carotene, that is vitamin A, and the deeper the fresh, the more that vitamin A is, other minerals. Of course, we want local adaptation. Calabasa is highly tolerant to tropical climate. So it can grow under heat, under humidity. It's tolerant to many, many diseases. So disease is not a major problem, although there's some diseases, if you don't take care of the plant, they can take over, like the mildews, for example. Those can take over. And especially when the plant is a set fruit, meaning it's giving all the resources to newly formed fruit. That's when it's most vulnerable to insect attack and diseases. And when that happens, it can rapidly decline and die. So you end up having a fruit, but it hasn't accumulated enough sugar, so the flavor may be off. Or if it loses most of the leaves due to diseases, then and there's no foliage covering the fruit, then the sunburn would affect the flavor of the fruit, at least on one side that is exposed to the sun. So our goal is to improve Calabasa pumpkin based on the traits that I just discussed. And our initial efforts have been funded by UF-IFAS through a program called the SEED-IT, which is a support for emerging enterprise development integration teams. And what we are trying to do is to do a needs assessment, assess the production systems. Production system means either organic or conventional, and then look at some of the products that can value addition that can be added and used in the market, such as we've talked about the pumpkin ale, Calabasa ale. When you go to breweries, they typically don't use the fresh market. They don't just have fruits sitting in the brewery and then they cut them and use them in the brewing process. Rather, they use the canned pumpkin, and that's what they use for making their beer, or they use the pumpkin spice flavor. So there's been an interest from breweries, for example, to use locally grown Florida Calabasa for their ale industry. And over the last decade, the ale industry has blossomed from 47 to 480. With the COVID now, I don't know the current numbers. So the goal, this is a chart that shows what we are trying to do in this project. So for the flesh, we're trying to identify the choke points in the retail. Where are the retailers preferring, for example, Calabasa from Caribbean? Is it that they don't like the Calabasa in Florida? What is lacking? Is it a price point? If we can figure that out, then as scientists, we can help our growers and determine the best Calabasa to grow and how to grow it and how to cut down the cost to be able to become competitive in the market. This flesh is also used in restaurants. They prefer smaller fruit and more flavorful. There's a community-supported agriculture where people can ship boxes, vegetables and Calabasa in boxes to various places. Canning is also a potential. And then the seeds, as I mentioned, the seed butter is growing in popularity across the country as healthy foods are being adopted. Then snacks, trail mixes, the seeds are common, you can commonly see them. Nutritional bars and seed powder. If you go for any smoothie place, you might have seen an option for seed powder, pumpkin seed powder to be added to as a source of protein. Seed oil is also, we're looking at that. How can growers produce their own seed oil, even if it's at a small capacity, and how would it sell in the local market? And these are across the platform, the systems that we're going to be targeting. So organic farming, for example, we have growers that can test the Calabasa under this system. And then conventional farming, we have growers that will do this. And then we are hoping to get home gardeners that can grow the Calabasa under that system and give us the results of what they prefer or how the plants do under their system. So as a breeder, the first thing that you want to look at is what is currently in the market. What are growers growing, and kind of gauge the productivity of this, the flavor, these traits that we just talked about, because then we can decide empirically which crosses to make, which combinations to take forth. So early on in 2017, 2018, that's what I did, was just take some of the popular pumpkins. For example, Sola, to your far left, top left, is a pumpkin from Jamaica. No, actually from Puerto Rico. La Estrella is a cultivar that was developed from US back in 2002. Then we have Jamaican pumpkin, several strains of Jamaican pumpkin. Seminole, which is native to Florida. And then we have some of the inbred lines that we've been developing over time. So we took them to the field and took just general yield data. And you can say JP5, which is the third row, gave the highest yield. But as I'll show you in the preceding slide, it wasn't the best testing. The best testing from the survey was JP1 here, but the yield wasn't as much compared to JP5 and others. So already you can see these gaps that we're identifying. Better testing, we're looking at yield. So if anything, we can focus on JP1 and try to improve its yield. But where are we going to get the Calabasa that produces more yield? Well, you can look from the fruit per plant here. You can already see if you cross JP1 and Seminole, these are 5 on average, 5 fruits per plant, then you're going to increase the yield for JP1. You can also cross it with TP331, which has 3 fruits per plant. And that's one way to increase the yield. Now, the challenge is JP1 has a much larger fruit, while Seminole and TP331 have much smaller fruit. So when you cross them, you're going to have a smaller fruit size. So then it becomes complicated because then you have to introduce another cross, another parent such as Solar, which has, if you look at the fruit weight, has the highest fruit rate, 13 pounds. Then you have to include it in the breeding to recover the size of it. So it takes generations of this to come to a point where you can have a Calabasa that is good testing, high yield, and the right quality and such as shape that you want. So that gave us an idea. And the breeding process involves taking the male flower and female flower. Now you can see that the female flower is one that has a little bulb at the bottom here, and the male is one that doesn't have that. And once they open up, you just rub the open male pollen on the female. And you can, if you have issues with insects, you can close the flower with a tape so that they don't contaminate your process. Then you need ample space in the greenhouse for this breeding process because most of these cultivars are vining. So we provide, for example, just the fence material they use at construction sites. We erect those in the greenhouse, and the plants are able to climb. But some of them are bush, as you can see down on the greenhouse here. They don't grow much larger than this, but those are the few, the fewer cultivars that we have in the market. Yeah, so large space requirement, even in the field, again, large space requirement. Just things to keep in mind. One component that we've been keen on doing is, as we're selecting this Calabasa, is to invite stakeholders to test, to be part of the process. I believe it's much easier if the growers and the retailers and the restaurants know what is coming down the pipeline, because then it's much easier for them to adapt it. It's much easier to come and source for it. So we partner with, at least in 2018, we partnered with stakeholders, and they came and tested some of our best Calabasa lines, and they helped in the grading. And some of them made curry. You can see the yellow soup. They made some curry. They made some bread out of it. And you can see some seeds here, where they use the seeds to flavor or increase the nutrition of the meals. We just roasted to get the initial flavor from the fruit. And we allowed the stakeholders to take data on which is the best tasting. And we have the chefs listed down, and you can tell from the arrows here that JP1, as I mentioned, was one of the best cultivars here. Let's see, with an overall rate of 3 out of 5. And then we have some of the other lines that have long numbers. These are some of the lines that we are working on in the breeding program. So, for example, Cultivar 7, you can tell it performed even better than JP1. So these are some of the candidates that we are currently continuing in the breeding process. And so we are hoping every 2 years or so to be inviting stakeholders so they can be a part of the process. We're hoping to do this year. We'll see whether that will be possible with the COVID and everything else, where growers growers can actually come in and taste them. So really exciting. Some of our advanced lines now, we are probably in the 6th or 7th generation. Our advanced lines are showing good candidates for the restaurant and the community supported agriculture. And these are ones that generally they have high brick and less food weight, so that it's not cumbersome to ship it. So the grower can just put in box together with other vegetables, not take much space in the box and ship it out. So we have two good candidates for that, as you can tell. The bricks in terms of percentage, which is 1, 2, 3, the fourth column, is how sweet it is. So the higher the number, the more sweet the flesh should be. And we can measure that using a refractometer. The retail market, such as Publix, they would prefer pumpkins that are much bigger. And so we're talking anything between, over 8 pounds. And we have lines that are showing very high in terms of fruit weight. Yield is how many fruit yield per plant. The smaller the fruit, the higher the yield, as you can see from these numbers here. The bigger fruits that weigh 10 pounds, 9 pounds, you only get 2 fruits at most. That's why it seems on average there's less than 2 or 1.5. So you're making headway on these lines. Here, what you're looking at is on the graph on top, the lines, the screwy lines. So here it measures how orange the crop. So you get the juice from the plant, squeeze it out, and then you pass light through it. And however much light is absorbed is how much deep the color is. And that's what we call absorbance of the light. So they're absorbing the light. So for example, the line, the blue top line means that P24 retained most of its light. Most light was retained, less came out. And therefore we can tell that it's much deeper orange in color. It's an objective way and a quicker way of measuring instead of trying, looking at them and trying to figure out which one has more beta carotene. So some of the improved cultivars, Dr. Maynard, who was with UF, released a cultivar in 2002. For home gardeners, I would recommend this cultivar because it has good yield and it has a short vine, meaning it won't take over your garden. The vine would grow maximum, I would say 3 feet, 3.5 feet max. Depending on the growing conditions, some may grow a little bit longer or a little bit shorter, but they're even early yielding. For South Florida Central, I would say anything between 70 and 85 days, you have your fruit ready to harvest. So it's very early. When you compare to the older cultivars, which they start flowering 60 days, the female flowers start showing up 60 days. This cultivar would start showing females anything between 30 days, sometimes even less. So you're saving a whole month in terms of waiting for the fruit to start flowering. Some of the other lines we're trying to develop. So I mentioned about the beta carotene. Now, some of the ones that I showed were the flesh were almost yellow in color. You can tell the ones that I'm showing here, the beta carotene level just by looking at it is much deeper, and the flavor is much higher, which means it has higher content of vitamin A. Also, some of them have shorter vine. We don't want them to be very short. We want them because we've realized if it's too short, the fruit kind of doesn't mature to the plant dies sooner than you'd want. So Lastrella is perfect because it allows the leaves are enough for photosynthesis to continue and for us to be able to get a fruit that is fully matured. So we have several candidates that are coming up right now. As I said, this was in 2018, the field photo that you're seeing here. But right now, the generation we have, in 2021, we have 6 or 7 generation advanced this has been really exciting for us. All right. Okay. All right, so I did mention about ale, and as part of the project I mentioned about the seeded project, we are partnering with a brewery up north and a lab in Gainesville, a food science lab. And some of the lines that I showed, they cut them up, they roasted them, they did the science they do in the food chemistry lab, tested some of the parameters, and they showed that some of these 4 lines were the best in terms of for making ale. And they tested these lines in collaboration with First Magnitude Brewery in Gainesville, and they made, I think, 2 or 3 kegs, and it sold really quick. So the breweries have an interest in using locally sourced Calabasa for making their beer, which is exciting for us. So we'll try other value addition products, but at least this is promising to see that there's an actual adoption by other stakeholders and industry appreciating the Calabasa grown in Florida. Now, as I mentioned, the project is expanding really fast. This year, we got a grant from the SARE, Sustainable Agriculture Research Education Program. And now we are taking the Calabasa across 4 states, Florida, Georgia, Alabama, and Puerto Rico. And all these states are good for producing Calabasa, and for each of those, it will be different times of the year that they would generally produce it. But for Florida, especially South Florida, you can produce it the whole year. And the goal of the project is to look at sustainable organic production systems for Calabasa and also conventional ones, take data on yield, survey both consumers and suppliers to see what the choke points are. But now, instead of just Florida, we are looking at it in the South region or Southeast regional, and look at some of the pests that are common in the different states, so that from a breeding standpoint, I can be on the lookout for just intended with these diseases and pests. Okay, okay. So how to grow Calabasa? As I mentioned, there's 3 main ways. You can grow, if you have a large farm, you can put things like plastic mulch at the bottom here and follow the guidelines through the Vegetable Production Handbook by UF. For organic growers, they don't have much space, and they have restrictions as to what pesticide they can use, what kind of material they can use in their farm. So for them, the system is a little bit different. Plastic mulch is allowed in organic farming, but for them, it's very important to have cultivars that are tolerant to diseases, just because they can't spray much to control the diseases. For home gardeners, which I believe most of us are today, you have less space, so you want to give a chance of the plant growing. So if you have seeds, you want to start them in a seed bed to give the chance of them germinating. And most home gardeners, sometimes there's birds that come in the backyard, or things that will dig up the seed and eat it. So you may want to start transplants. So you take a flat cell tray, sow the seeds inside, let them germinate, and then you take the seedlings and transplant directly on the ground. And you make these mounds. A mound is just basically a hill. You transplant in there and cover it. Make sure the roots are well covered. You water it. And for fertilizer, you can use locally available fertilizer that they recommend for Calabasa from stores like Lowe's, and just follow the recommendation. For most of the cases, it's typically fertigating once a week. So So that's, and I don't know whether any most of the home gardeners here have had a chance to grow them. And as I mentioned, I would prefer using the short vine cultivars for home gardeners. But if you have a longer fence, you might want to go with the longer open pollinated types. You just need to trail it around the fence. So the good thing about the long vine is that it can keep growing. I mean, it can keep growing 6 months, even a year, so long as it's getting the water. So you have a continuous production of Calabasa every couple of months. So, but the challenge is you have to keep trailing it so that it doesn't overtake the garden. For the short vines, it's much, they have, after 3 months, 4 months, the plant will die because it doesn't continually reproduce the leaves, for example. Once it finishes setting up, produces the fruits are mature, it's gone, it's done. So it's up to the preference of the home gardener, really, what they want to grow. You can direct seed the plants, but I would still suggest to use mounds or heels. And that is in case you don't have things that will come and dig up the seed. We have had organic farmers that have, for example, wild turkeys or birds that come and dig up the seed. And even rats, rodents, that they come and take the seed off the ground. So for home gardeners, I would say just try sowing them in a pot or something and then transplant them. In terms of where you can produce it, you can produce it anywhere in Florida, but in southern and particularly central Florida, you can, August through March is typical. For North Florida, you want to make sure that you avoid the danger for frost. So sometime after probably February, March, there might be a safer bet for people up north. They can actually even grow it early July and harvest the crop in October or November before the chilly temperatures come through. With the right seeding, you want to do 1 inch deep and 3 to 4 feet apart. And for the things like Lastrella, which is short vine, you can even get away for a home garden. You can get away with 2 feet because they won't take over the garden. They'll grow 3 to 3.5 feet long. So you don't have that problem with things growing into each other and you can't find what you're looking for. So, but if you're growing the long vine, certainly you want them to grow as, you want to give them a little bit of space. One thing that we do in our breeding process in the field, as you can see on this picture, is we try to coil the plants because we need to take data on each individual plant. And sometimes they grow so much into each other. So we take the tip of the plant and just coil it around as it grows. So we have this huge plant keep, growing around a center or a circumference. For home gardeners, you may want to do that as well. One critical thing is for the fruit to set, you need bees. So you want to make sure that you don't spray things that will keep the bees away, or if you're going to grow them in a screen, and make sure that the bees have access, can get in there and do the pollination for them. Otherwise, you have to go in there and manually do the pollination. And pollination for a fruit to mature, it needs some sort of stimulation. It needs to know that this seed that is not just growing for the sake of growing, it needs that it's nurturing seed. So that's why applying the pollen on the female flower, which the bees does it for us. But when the pollen lands on the stigma, the plant assumes the seed starts growing. The seed will start growing, so it starts growing to make sure that it nurtures the fruit, and then eventually it matures. The fruit doesn't really care that we eat it. It cares about the seed that is for the next generation, for propagation. So that's the trick. That's why we need to have seeds. We have to have bees that do this work for us, or we either do it ourselves. For harvesting, there's different types of cultivars out there. As I mentioned, for the Lastrella, it's really 70 to 85 days. You have your fruits ready to go. For others, like the solar, I mean, they take 40 to 60 days to produce the first female flower. So it may take even up to 3.5, 4 months before you can have your fruit. And that's a typical maturity for these older cultivars anyways. Once you harvest the fruit, you can store it at 50 to 60 degrees, just in a normal walk-in. If you have a walk-in fridge, you can put it in there, or you can cut. Once you cut it, though, it won't last for very long. You can freeze it, though. You can freeze it in slices. That might be better, and cook it over time. Some of the seed sources for Australia, you can get it from Seedway, from Root Seeds. Many local markets will sell Calabasa, and these cultivars are the long vine. They take longer to flower, but you can actually go buy the pumpkin, cut it, save the seed, put it in a cool. Once they dry, put in a cool place, and then grow them in the next generation for the next season, and keep doing that and saving the seed. Our breeding program, sometimes when we have enough seed, we are able to distribute a small amount, 5 to 10 seeds to people. But keep in mind, some of the trial hybrids that we have are hybrids, meaning if you save the seed the next generation, it won't look necessarily the same, because when we're making the hybrids, we're using two specific parents, parent A and parent B, and they combine to yield what you see in the field or in the garden. If you save that seed, the genes are shuffled again, and when you grow them out, they won't look as the seeds that you received originally. But we also can provide open pollinated varieties like Jamaican strains and some Seminoles, Solar, just a few seeds for the growers that are interested in trying this. Some of the common diseases, we have viruses. Generally, Calabasa is highly tolerant to many of these diseases. So this wouldn't be really a concern, but just in case you see this, so that you wouldn't be surprised. So the potiviruses include the papaya ring spot virus, watermelon mosaic virus, zucchini yellow mosaic virus, and these are transmitted by aphids, and I'll show a picture of aphids in a minute. And they destroy the leaves, they deform it so that there's no photosynthetic area, so the fruits don't form well. They also distort the fruit outside of the fruit, and the fruit becomes unmarketable. Then we have the Cuban leaf crumple, which is basically transmitted by whiteflies. This hasn't been a major problem recently, but in the last couple of years, it did cause some losses. But honestly, these viruses are not a big problem for Calabasa. Calabasas are, they are tolerant. Now, the main challenges you may have is things like powdery mildew and downy mildew. Yeah, they have a level of tolerance. They're not as susceptible as the zucchinis and the yellow summers, but still you may want to control the powdery and downy mildew. Downy mildew can knock out the plant within a few days. So we want to keep seed products that are registered for Calabasa so that you can systematically or preventatively use it. Phytophthora is a big issue for the yellows and the zucchinis, but not for Calabasas really. The common insects, squash vine borer, is a main issue. They typically, when the fruits are, or the seedlings are young, they bore into the base of the plant, and the plant just collapse, and they provide opportunity for secondary infections. Then we have whiteflies, which transmit the Cuban leaf crumple virus that I just mentioned. But they also feed, the nymphs feed, and they give a silvering sort of appearance on the leaves, as you can tell here. And then we have the aphids, which transmit the potiviruses, such as the mosaic viruses that I just mentioned. And then we have cucumber beetle. In general, this is how you control them. So you don't want to keep planting. For gardeners, you only have one garden in your backyard. But if you can split the area such that you don't grow in the exact same spot you did, because typically if you had insects, they would burrow in the ground and wait until the next season. So if you plant in the same spot, it will just be, the problem will increase over time. I would say start your Calabasa as early as possible. So as soon as the frost is gone, the earliest, if you're up north a little bit, the earliest, the better, because then as the temperatures warm up, the insect population starts building up. The diseases, the conditions for the diseases also start getting better. So you want to start as early as possible. When the plant is much, much healthier, even if the diseases come up, and these are often unavoidable, then the plant is already healthy enough and it can withstand and give you crops despite the pressure. As soon as the squash plants are finished, dispose of them, especially if they were infected. This is especially good habit when you're growing the things like the ones that are short vine, because after the fruit is the yield is done and the fruit is formed, the plant generally declines. But if you have the longer vine and you want them to continue growing, then certainly, and they are healthy, I wouldn't dispose them. I'll just keep them and keep harvesting the fruit every couple of months. And you can clip, because the vines are multiple vines in a Calabasa. So if they are taking too much garden space, you can clip some of the vines and leave a main vine. It won't be as productive, but at least you won't take over your garden. If you have a bigger space, you can use the recommended pesticides. Otherwise, you can go to like the U.S. Vegetable Production Handbook and look at that, and it's available online as well. And the link is down here. I believe William can provide this later to growers. So use the recommended pesticide and practices. There's natural insecticides and fungicides that are out in the market labeled for squash that you can use as well. All right, so this is the team that makes all this happen. My students and biologists and other labs that we collaborate across Florida and Southeast, and then the funding agencies that have been supporting our work. And with that, I'd like to open the floor. Thank you for your attention. For any questions and comments.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Meru. That was great. I know I learned a lot, and I think I'm planning on putting some Calabasa in my garden in mid to late July this year and give it a try. If anybody has any questions, please go ahead and put them down in the chat box, and we'll go ahead and share them and get them answered. And since I don't see any questions on here yet, let me try something new and give everybody a little quick poll here. Hopefully others can see that. So it's just 3 quick questions about how satisfied were you with today's workshop? How much did you learn? And are you planning on using any of this information in your garden? And if you guys can see the questions, please go ahead and answer. We'll go ahead and leave this up here for a moment or two to give everybody a chance to go ahead and put your opinion in and let us know how we did. And hopefully you learned as much as I did. I know I'm always looking for new vegetables, things that I can be successful with in my garden. And if you guys are watching on a computer there, if you can go ahead and get some answers in. Okay, great. Okay, we'll go ahead and save that for a moment. Like I said, if anybody has a question, please go ahead and put it in the chat box. It should be set correctly. So Dr. Meru, I have a question for you. I live here in Hernando County in Central Florida. When would be the best time for me to try growing this? Was it better in very early spring or starting in, let's say, mid to late July and going into the fall?
I think both options would work. both options would work. So I assume your soils are a little sandy.
Yes, my soil is very, very sandy.
Yeah.
I'm working on building it up.
Okay.
I'm making compost and adding organic matter.
Okay. Yeah, either of those would be great. You just, for spring you want to avoid the frost, and then for fall you want to avoid the cold temperature, the winter temperatures, as they said. So around end of September, so if you plant in July, you should have your crop ready by then.
Okay, yeah, we usually don't get freezes and frosts here till December, January, and February. We do get freezing weather here, but it's not for very long.
Perfect.
And
perfect. That's
boy,
good.
I've tried growing yellow squash and zucchini. Oh my gosh, that's difficult with the diseases. I don't get very far with that.
Yeah, that has been the case here as well. They are very productive, but very susceptible.
Yeah. Okay, we got a question here from Elaine. She wants to know, what website would I use to see if UF is offering any seeds? So how could she get in touch with you guys to see if you have any free or test seeds available?
Okay, you can directly get in touch with my email. And William, if you don't mind, you can provide, you have an email list, you can provide the email that they can reach out to me. And we can ship them to them.
Okay, let me go ahead and pull your email up here. Okay, I went ahead and put Dr. Meru's email in the chat box, so everybody should be able to see it. But if you can't, it is gmeru@ufl.edu. And if anybody has any last minute questions here for us to answer. Okay, looks like a pretty quiet crowd here today, Dr. Meru, but everybody stayed on pretty much to watch it. Like I said, I learned a lot. I'm definitely going to try growing it myself. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us here today. I did record this, so we'll have the recording up and available. The best way to find that is going to be on our Facebook page in a couple of days. We have to send it off to do the post process. Heather says, thank you so much, great info. And Lee says, I live in zone 10B. When do I plant? So when would you plant this down in zone 10B?
Which app is that?
10B would be pretty much Homestead. When do you have the most luck planting it down there in Homestead?
Oh, okay, yeah. So that will be basically in South Florida. We want to avoid summer when it's just too much rain, because what happens, it makes it easier for the borers and the larvae to burrow in. So anything between, you can plant early August, harvest December, and then you can also plant during spring around February and harvest by May, and just avoid that 2 months of intense rain that we receive down here.
Okay, yeah, I know there's very little that we can grow June, July, and August here in Central Florida. It's just too hot, too wet. And nobody wants to be outside gardening that time of year anyway, so.